Something in that corner of the frame is wrong. You can't name it yet. The porch light is on, the yard looks empty, and the timestamp says 1904, August 21st, 1955. But there's a shape at the very edge, where the lens distorts and the evening light turns everything the color of old film. It's probably nothing. That's what you tell yourself. That's always what you tell yourself, right before it isn't. This is a farmhouse in rural Christian County, Kentucky. The camera angle is wide and low, the way surveillance footage always seems to catch the thing you weren't meant to see. The porch boards are weathered. There's a screen door, slightly crooked on its hinges, a wash line to the left, a rusted pump handle visible at the edge of the frame. Ordinary. Completely, aggressively ordinary. And yet something is sitting in that right-hand corner shadow that your eye keeps returning to, that your brain keeps flagging, that you cannot quite resolve into anything familiar. The grain of the image doesn't help. Neither does the fisheye pull at the lens edge, bending the fence line just slightly, just enough to make you unsure of distances. That shape, that low, pale shape at the corner post. Is it a bucket? A dog curled up? A trick of the dusk light against weathered timber? Keep watching, because the thing about evidence footage is that it doesn't explain itself to you. It just keeps running. Timestamp ticking forward. 1905, 1906. The shape doesn't move, and that is somehow worse than if it had. What you are looking at is the beginning of what would become, over the following 69 years, one of the most forensically documented and stubbornly unexplained close encounter cases in American history. 11 people, one night. 4 hours of sustained contact, hundreds of rounds fired, 20-plus law enforcement officers on scene by midnight, and at the end of it all, no bodies, no craft, no explanation that fully closes the case. Just shell casings, bullet holes, and a family that never changed their story. This is the Kelly-Hopkinsville encounter, and whatever was at that back door on the night of August 21st, 1955, it still has not been convincingly explained. Before we go any further into the footage, before the timestamps get worse, before the night vision kicks in and the shapes at the windows start to register, there is something you need to sit with for a moment. Something that the news coverage at the time, and frankly most of the skeptical coverage since, has quietly avoided. 11 people were in that farmhouse. 11. And not one of them, in the decades that followed, ever materially changed their account. Think about what that means. Think about how hard it is to get two people to agree on what happened at a dinner party 3 weeks ago. Now imagine 11 people, adults, children, relatives, a house guest, all traumatized, all describing the same entity in the same physical terms, independently, to police officers who showed up skeptical, to reporters who showed up looking for a joke, to Air Force investigators who showed up hoping to close the file. The family at the center of this was the Suttons. Glennie Langford, the matriarch, was a deeply religious woman, a member of the Church of Christ, who held alcohol as essentially sinful and ran a dry household. Her adult children were with her that night, Elmer, Lucky, and others, along with Billy Ray Taylor, a friend and house guest from Pennsylvania who had driven down with his wife, June. None of them had a television, no radio in the house, no telephone. It's 1955 rural Kentucky, and they are genuinely, thoroughly outside the loop of whatever popular culture was doing with flying saucer stories at the time. This matters, because when you try to build a hoax theory, you have to build a motive. And when you look at what actually happened to this family after that night, the mockery, the property invasion by curiosity seekers, the news trucks blocking their access to their own land, the neighbors who quietly stopped taking them seriously, you struggle to find the upside. They did not get rich. They did not get famous in any way they wanted. Glennie Langford reportedly found the whole aftermath humiliating and distressing. She was a proud woman, a church woman, and rural Kentucky in 1955 is not a social environment that rewards you for claiming you shot at space creatures. Nobody has ever seriously argued that they have the resources, the coordination, or the motive to stage 4 hours of a sustained hoax in front of 11 witnesses, in the dark, in a farmhouse with no phone, using props detailed enough to fool 20 police officers on scene 2 hours later. Nobody has argued it seriously because it doesn't hold together for more than about 45 seconds of actual thinking. And yet, nobody has fully explained them either. That is where we are. That is the frame that doesn't resolve. That is what makes this footage feel wrong, even 70 years later. It begins, as so many things do, with someone needing water. It's a few minutes before 7 in the evening. The light is still present but fading, that particular late summer dusk in western Kentucky where the sky holds gold for longer than you expect, and then the dark comes fast. Billy Ray Taylor, 21 years old, walks out to the property's outdoor well to draw water. The well is set some distance from the farmhouse, toward the back of the lot where the land slopes toward a shallow ravine, a gully that fills with scrub growth and shadow before the light is fully gone. Picture the image here as a night vision reconstruction. Green-tinted, grainy, the well handle visible on the left of frame, the gully descending into black-green dark beyond it. Timestamp, 1857. There's movement in the upper right corner of the frame, something crossing the sky above the tree line. Low, fast, not quite level. What Taylor describes is a disc-shaped object, bright, trailing some kind of light or exhaust, descending at an angle into the ravine behind the property. He stood there and watched it go down. He stood there for a moment after, in the silence, and then he went back inside and told the Suttons what he'd seen. And here is the last ordinary moment of the evening, because the Suttons laughed at him. Elmer Sutton, who was by all accounts not a man given to excessive patience or sentimentality, essentially told Taylor he'd seen a shooting star or some nonsense, and everyone should calm down. Glennie Langford, who we know was deeply religious and therefore had a complicated relationship with the idea of things falling out of the sky, said little. Billy Ray's wife, June, was probably embarrassed on his behalf. They went back to what they were doing. They ate. They talked. The sun finished going down. The gully behind the property went fully dark. And then, roughly an hour later, the dog started barking and then went completely silent. The kind of silence that, if you've ever had a farm dog suddenly stop mid-bark and press itself back against the house, you recognize immediately as wrong. And something appeared at the back door. If there is a single moment in the entire Kelly-Hopkinsville case that functions like a freeze frame on surveillance footage, it is this one. It is 8 p.m., approximately. The screen door opens outward. The porch light throws a pale rectangle onto the boards. And in that rectangle, something is standing. Every subsequent description from every witness who saw the figure that night converges on the same details with a consistency that investigators found either compelling or deeply troubling, depending on their priors going in. 3 to 4 feet tall, humanoid in shape but wrong, proportionally wrong, with a head that is too large and too round, and set too low on a body that seems to have no neck worth mentioning. Arms that are too long. Hands, or what functions as hands, with talon-like fingers that point downward. The skin or surface, every single witness agrees, was silver gray, with a kind of luminescence to it, as if it was generating its own dim light from within. And the eyes, every witness, every time, enormous, round, glowing yellow. Not reflective, not the orange-red eyeshine you get from a cat or a raccoon in a flashlight beam, actively luminous, producing light on their own. The figure appeared at the back door with its arms raised. This detail always gets glossed over, and it shouldn't, because it's ambiguous in a way that is genuinely interesting. Arms raised could mean threat. It could mean surrender. It could mean something that has no human analog. Glennie Langford thought it was trying to communicate. Elmer Sutton and Billy Ray Taylor thought it was trying to get in the door. They reached for their guns. And this is where Chief Greenwell's later comment becomes important, but we'll come back to that. For right now, Elmer Sutton has a .22 rifle. Billy Ray Taylor has a 20-gauge shotgun. And they are standing roughly 6 feet from a glowing 3-foot figure with enormous yellow eyes that has appeared without warning at the back door of a farmhouse in the dark. Elmer fires. Taylor fires. They are close. Point blank, or close enough that it shouldn't matter. And the figure floats backward, off the porch steps, off the porch railing, not falls, not stumbles, floats, and then keeps coming. The figure hit the ground and moved away, and they thought it was over, and it was not over. It was not close to over. What came next was 4 hours. 4 hours of this. And the evidence for those 4 hours is not witness testimony alone. It is shell casings, bullet holes, and the statements of 24 law enforcement officers. But that comes later. Right now, we are still at the back door, and the night is just beginning. Here is where the footage gets difficult to watch. Not because anything becomes clearer, because everything becomes more fragmented, more urgent, shot from worse angles. The CCTV reconstruction of those 4 hours shows you window lines, roof edges, porch corners. It shows you the interior of the farmhouse from a high corner angle, the way those old cameras used to capture spaces. Too wide, too flat. The people in it reduced to shapes moving in dim light. What those shapes are doing for 4 straight hours is shooting. After that first figure floated backward off the porch, after Sutton and Taylor established that their combined fire had knocked it down but not, apparently, killed it or even seriously discouraged it, the situation did not de-escalate. It escalated, rapidly, and in a way that follows a pattern so consistent across all 11 witnesses that investigators couldn't find daylight between their accounts. The creatures, and there appear to have been multiple, though the family was never certain of an exact number, settling on descriptions of somewhere between 2 and 4 distinct figures over the course of the night, worked the perimeter of the farmhouse. They appeared at windows. They appeared on the roof. They appeared at the front porch and the back porch in alternating sequence, as if testing for access points, as if patient. The window scenes are the ones that stay with you. Doorbell cam angle, low and wide. The porch railing in the foreground, and at the glass, a shape. That same large round head. Those same glowing eyes pressing against the window screen, looking in. Not shaking the glass, not trying to break through, just watching. Several witnesses described this. The face at the window, the eyes, the long arms that appeared below the face as if the creature was gripping the windowsill from outside. Elmer Sutton shot at them through the window screens. The bullet holes were found later by police, consistent with the firing positions the family described, consistent with firing from inside toward targets at the window height the family described. This is not contested. The physical evidence confirms the firing positions. What it can't confirm is what was at the other end of those firing lines. Then the roof. One of the adult men, the accounts differ slightly on which, went outside at some point during the engagement to check the side yard, and as he stepped out onto the side porch, a hand came down from the roof eaves and grabbed him by the hair. He yelled. The others pulled him back inside. When they looked up, something was on the roof line, above the eaves, crouching in the way the witnesses described as wrong, knees bending backward, not forward, the joints going the wrong direction. They shot at it. The thing moved, dropped or floated down to the ground, again consistently described as floating, not falling, and retreated into the darkness at the edge of the yard. And then, at some point in the third hour, one of the creatures was shot out of a tree. Taylor fired up into an old maple at the edge of the property at something he could see in the branches, the glowing eyes giving it away in the dark. He connected. He was certain he connected. The creature came out of the tree and did not fall. It descended at roughly the speed of a leaf, witnesses said, slow, horizontal, landed and kept going. You cannot explain that with a bird or a reflection. You cannot explain that with mass hysteria in a family that includes adults independently positioned at different compass points of the house, all of whom describe the same trajectory, the same speed, the same wrong-way descent. By the time the police were counting shell casings, and they counted them carefully, enough to establish that a substantial and sustained exchange of fire had taken place over multiple hours, the floor of the farmhouse and the surrounding yard had been turned into a kind of involuntary crime scene. Nobody planned it that way. Nobody was thinking forensically. They were thinking about whether the things at the windows were coming through the windows. But the evidence accumulated anyway, the way it does in trauma. You leave a record whether you mean to or not. At 11 p.m., the Sutton family loaded into their cars and drove to the Hopkinsville Police Department. Every single person who had been in that farmhouse, including the children, went with them. They left the farmhouse unattended and drove 25 minutes in the dark to the nearest police station. Now pause on that for a moment, because if you know anything about rural Kentucky culture in 1955, or honestly, about rural culture anywhere in America in that era, you understand what that drive represents. You do not go to the police with your problems. You handle things. You especially do not go to the police to report that silver-gray creatures with glowing yellow eyes have been pressing their faces against your window screens for 3 hours. You swallow that story and you take it to your grave. But they drove to Hopkinsville, 11 of them, and they walked in and they told the desk sergeant what had happened. And here is where Chief Russell Greenwell enters this footage, because Greenwell is one of those figures in this case that the debunkers have to work around rather than work with. He was not a credulous man. He was not new to his job. He was a senior law enforcement officer in a county seat police department, which means he had seen people lie to him, seen people confused, seen people drunk, seen people genuinely traumatized, and developed over the course of his career an ability to assess which one he was looking at. He looked at the Sutton family and their house guests. He looked at Elmer Sutton, whose pulse, recorded by someone present, possibly a doctor who was called, the accounts vary slightly, was measured at approximately 140 beats per minute. Resting. Sitting in a chair in the police station. Not running, not fighting, just sitting and talking. And his heart was going at 140. You want to know what 140 resting pulse looks like? It looks like someone who has been genuinely, recently, seriously afraid for their life. It looks like the adrenaline hasn't cleared yet. It looks like the body still thinks it is in the situation it just came from. Greenwell said later, in documented statements that have been quoted in virtually every serious examination of this case, that these were not people who come to the police for help. These are people who handle things themselves. In his assessment, the professional assessment of a man whose job was to determine what was actually happening in front of him, what he was looking at was real. He believed them. Not necessarily in the sense that he thought he could explain what they'd seen, but in the sense that he did not think they were lying, or drunk, or putting on a show. And then he sent 20 officers out to the farmhouse. not 2, 20. Plus, he coordinated with the Christian County Sheriff's Office and, according to some accounts, notification went to Fort Campbell, which is the Army base approximately 20 miles away, which explains why military police from Fort Campbell were also present on scene that night. 20 officers from multiple agencies at midnight. Because of what Chief Greenwell assessed when he looked at that family's faces, here is what 20-plus law enforcement officers from 4 agencies documented at the Kelly farmhouse in the hours after midnight on August 22, 1955. Hundreds of shell casings. Everywhere. Inside the house, outside on the porch, in the yard. Consistent with a high volume of fire sustained over several hours. Not consistent with a small number of warning shots or a brief encounter. Consistent, specifically, with the 4-hour engagement the family described.
Bullet holes in window screens, multiple windows, from the inside. The angles and heights consistent with firing positions a person inside the house would use to shoot at something at exterior window height. Not random, not decorative, forensically consistent. Property damage on the exterior of the house consistent with a sustained disturbance. Things knocked over, disturbed, displaced. The kind of ambient damage that accumulates over several hours of chaotic activity. And then what they found nothing of. No creature, no craft, no biological material, no tracks in the soft ground near the ravine beyond what the family had left. No evidence of any large animal having been in the area. No feathers, no fur, no scat, no blood, despite an enormous volume of fire at close range. No residue of any kind in the gully where Taylor had seen the descending light earlier in the evening. Clean. Absolutely clean. The physical evidence confirmed the engagement. It could not confirm what the engagement was with. And then, separately, a state highway trooper driving in the area that same night independently reported seeing luminous objects passing over the highway in the direction of the Kelly property. Not connected to the Sutton family, not aware of what was happening at the farmhouse, not reporting to the same station. A different person, in a different location, seeing something anomalous in the same area at approximately the same time. This detail tends to get buried in the accounts because it complicates things. The family's testimony you can theoretically compartmentalize: mass hysteria, collective delusion, shared misidentification. But the highway trooper was alone, in a car, on a road, with no social context connecting him to the farmhouse event. He saw something move through the sky toward Kelly and described it as luminous. He reported it because he was a professional and it seemed worth reporting. Project Blue Book, the Air Force's official UFO investigation program, collected the Kelly-Hopkinsville case. They investigated it after a fashion. And their conclusion, after interviewing witnesses and reviewing the physical evidence, was essentially to leave it in the unresolved column. They did not explain the highway trooper's report. They did not explain the shell casing count. They did not offer an alternative account of what 11 people fired at for 4 hours. They quietly filed it and moved on. So what then? What do we do with a case like this 70 years on? What do we do with evidence that confirms everything except the most important part? The most serious alternative explanation on the record comes from Joe Nickel, who is a professional skeptic and investigator with a long history of rigorous case analysis. His 2006 Great Horned Owl hypothesis is not trivial. It deserves to be taken seriously, which is why we are going to walk through it, and then walk through what it doesn't explain. Great horned owls are large birds. They can stand nearly 2 feet tall with feathers fully extended. Their eyes are enormous, round, highly reflective of ambient light. In the right conditions, notably low-angle artificial light such as porch lighting, their eyes will catch the light and appear to glow orange or yellow. They are powerful and will attack humans if they feel threatened or are protecting territory. They can strike at head height if approaching from a tree or a low elevation, and they are nocturnal, active precisely at the hours in question. Moreover, and this is the part of Nichols' argument that is most compelling, multiple owls in proximity to a farmhouse during a humid summer night is not unusual in rural Kentucky. They follow prey. They roost in old trees near structures, and in darkness, with adrenaline rising and firearms already in hand, a large owl's silhouette pressing against a window screen might register as something worse than an owl. That is the strongest version of the hypothesis, and it is worth sitting with because the alternative is considerably stranger. But here is what the owl hypothesis does not explain. It does not explain the silver-gray luminescence. Owls are brown and buff and white. They are not silver, they do not produce their own light, and in multiple lighting conditions the family and witnesses were specific about this. The creatures glowed, not reflective, not eye shine, glowing from the surface outward.
It does not explain the 4-foot height. The family described something 3 to 4 feet tall, humanoid in proportion, standing upright. Great horned owls are impressive animals, but they are not 4 feet tall standing, even stretched, even in shadow. The family knew what an owl looked like. Rural Kentucky farm people in 1955 are not going to mistake a bird for a 4-foot humanoid at close range in a lit doorway on their own back porch. It does not explain the 4-hour duration. Owls spook. If you fire a rifle at an owl multiple times from close range, the owl goes. It does not return to the window 40 minutes later, and then again an hour after that. The pattern of behavior the family described, the sustained perimeter probing, the alternating appearances at different compass points of the house, the apparent coordination, is not owl behavior. And most critically, it does not explain the absorption of direct rifle fire. Billy Ray Taylor's 20-gauge shotgun, at the range he fired it, should have produced physical evidence. A great horned owl hit by a 20-gauge at close range would produce very obvious physical evidence. There were no feathers, no blood, no body. And Elmer Sutton was an experienced shot. The family knew they had connected, multiple times. Whatever they hit did not die the way things die when you shoot them. So the owl hypothesis covers maybe the first encounter, maybe, in the most generous reading. It does not cover what followed. In the years after that night, the Sutton family's life did not improve as a result of their experience. Glennie Langford endured a period in which the farm became a destination for curiosity seekers, reporters, and investigators, all of whom treated her property as if it were public access and her family's trauma as if it were content. The physical intrusion onto the property, people parking in the fields, wandering the gully, pressing on the back door, was, by multiple accounts, genuinely distressing to a woman who valued her privacy and her dignity. The family was offered money, movies, testimonials, commercial appearances. The cultural appetite for this story has never really diminished. If anything, it grows. Every decade produces a new round of documentaries, a new wave of researchers, a new theory. Hopkinsville itself eventually leaned into the story, establishing an annual festival called Little Green Men Days, which, depending on who in the family you asked, they found anything from mildly bemusing to actively irritating. They had not wanted to be a tourist attraction. They had not wanted any of this. What they wanted, as best as can be determined from their various statements over the years, was to have been believed, not celebrated. Believed. There is a difference. They were not performing. They were not inviting attention. They were 11 people who experienced something they could not explain and then paid a social price in their own community for 4 decades afterward for saying so. Elmer Sutton died without recanting. Glennie Langford died without recanting. Billy Ray Taylor maintained his account until his death. June Taylor maintained hers. The younger witnesses, who were children in 1955, grew up and were occasionally tracked down by researchers, and their accounts remained consistent with what they had described as children. You cannot sustain a lie for that long, across that many people, across that many decades, with that much social pressure to just let it go, unless you are protecting something that is actually true, or unless you have constructed an identity so thoroughly around the lie
that backing away from it would cost you more than maintaining it. And even then, the cost of maintaining it for this family was not nothing. It was real. Rural Kentucky in 1955 through the 1980s did not have a flattering social category for people who claimed encounters with non-human intelligences. The church didn't know what to do with it. The neighbors didn't know what to do with it. The family bore that in silence for the most part and held their account. Air Force investigators who worked Project Blue Book were thorough by the standards of their time and their mandate. They collected this case, they documented it, and they did not close it. Not in the way they closed cases where a weather balloon or an astronomical object provided a satisfactory explanation. Kelly-Hopkinsville went into the unresolved column and stayed there, and the Air Force, an institution not typically given to preserving mysteries when explanations are available, never provided one.
The highway trooper's sighting, the independent one, the one from a man alone in a vehicle with no connection to the farmhouse, that one is never addressed in the Project Blue Book documentation of this case. Not explained, not dismissed, not incorporated, noted and set aside, which is itself a kind of answer, if you're willing to look at it directly. So here we are. We come back, at the end, to where we began. That porch, that frame, that timestamp, 1904, August 21st, 1955. And that shape at the edge of the image that your eye keeps returning to, that your brain keeps flagging as wrong. The footage doesn't resolve. That's the thing about evidence. Sometimes the evidence confirms everything except the thing you most need it to confirm. It tells you the guns were fired. It tells you the windows were shot from the inside. It tells you 11 people were genuinely, physiologically, bone-deeply afraid. It tells you 20 law enforcement officers drove to this farmhouse and took it seriously enough to search it for hours. It tells you the highway was not empty and the sky above Kelly, Kentucky was doing something unusual on the night of August 21st, 1955. And then it stops. The footage goes to static. The gully stays dark. The gully has stayed dark for 70 years. Whatever came to the back door of the Kelly farmhouse that summer evening stayed for 4 hours, absorbed a significant volume of rifle and shotgun fire, moved in ways that witnesses described consistently and investigators couldn't explain, left no biological trace, and then was gone. Somewhere out past the tree line, past the ravine, past the reach of the porch light and the scope of the investigation, and the edge of everything we have been able to verify since. The timestamp ticks. 1907, 1908. The shape at the corner of the porch doesn't move. You keep watching because you think if you look long enough, the image will tell you what it is. That's the promise of surveillance footage, of evidence frames, of documentation. We record things because we believe that the record will, eventually, mean something. That the grain and the green glow and the fisheye lens will deliver the truth to us if we're patient enough. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes the footage just keeps running, and the shape stays at the edge of the frame, and the time stamp advances, and you are left exactly where the Sutton family was left in the morning of August 22nd, 1955, staring at a yard that holds no trace of what you know was there, and knowing that not knowing is its own kind of answer. The porch light is still on. The screen door is still slightly crooked on its hinges. The gully is still dark. And whatever the Kelly farmhouse footage found, whatever it documented, whatever those shell casings were witness to, is still unresolved, still out there past the edge of the frame, still waiting to be the thing that your eye keeps returning to, that your brain keeps telling you is wrong. Watch the corner. Watch it long enough. Something is there.